The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was quiet except for the soft hum of life support systems. 47 different species sat in their special chairs and breathing tanks, each one adapted for their unique biology. The air shimmered with translation fields that turned alien words into understanding. Ambassador Keithvar stepped forward. His body was made of living crystal that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. But today those colors were dim and flickering. Fear made his crystalline form shake as he walked to the center of the massive chamber. Honored members of the council, Keithvar began, his voice carrying across the hall through speakers and translation devices. I come before you with the darkest news my people have ever faced. The assembled aliens shifted in their seats. Some had tentacles that curled with worry. Others had scales that changed color when they felt stress. The air itself seemed to grow heavier with tension. 3 cycles ago, our deep space monitors detected something terrible, the Zilani ambassador continued. The Devourer fleet has changed course. They are heading directly for our home system. Our scientists calculate they will arrive in 27 standard days. A sound like wind through broken glass filled the chamber. It was the collective intake of breath from dozens of alien species. The Devourer fleet was known throughout the galaxy. They were the nightmare that haunted every civilized world. For over 300 years, the Devourers had moved through space like a plague. Their ships were part machine and part living creature. They consumed entire planets, turning the matter and energy into more ships for their fleet. 17 star systems had fallen to them in just the past year. Billions of lives had been lost. We have broadcast distress signals on every frequency, Keithvar said, his voice growing more desperate. We have reached out to every species we know. My people are not warriors. We are philosophers and artists. Our ships are for exploration, not war. We cannot stand against the Devourers alone. High Counselor Vex Thane of the Altarian Collective floated in his hoverpod. His blue-gray skin had patches that glowed when he spoke. Ambassador Keithvar, we understand your fear. The entire council feels deep sympathy for your situation. But Keithvar heard the word that was coming next. He had heard it from every species he had contacted. However, Vex Thane continued, the Devourer fleet has never been defeated. No species has successfully defended against them. We cannot ask our people to sacrifice their lives in a battle that cannot be won. Around the chamber, other representatives began to speak. Each one said essentially the same thing in their own way. The Catherian Empire, masters of energy weapons and shields, claimed their forces were committed to defending our core worlds. Their reptilian ambassador's neck frills flared with what humans would recognize as embarrassment, though he tried to hide it. The Nexari Union had the most advanced technology in the known galaxy. Their robotic representative spoke in perfectly measured tones. Resource allocation protocols prevent deployment of assets with 0 probability of mission success. Even the Harmonium, a species known throughout the galaxy for their charity and kindness, could only offer spiritual support and meditation guidance for your people's final days. The Morden delegate's tentacles writhed with agitation, but she still said, our battle fleets are positioned to defend against possible Devourer expansion into our territory. We cannot leave our borders unprotected. One by one, every member of the Galactic Council found a reason why they could not help. Each excuse was logical. Each one made perfect sense from a military and political standpoint. Each one meant that 12 billion Zilani would die. Keithvar felt something break inside his crystalline chest. You would let an entire species die because the odds are poor? We would not let 47 species die because one cannot be saved, Vex Thane replied coldly. The mathematics of survival are harsh, Ambassador. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. The session dragged on for hours, but the result never changed. Some representatives offered to help evacuate a small portion of the Zilani population. Others promised to remember their civilization in the galactic archives. A few even offered to name star formations after Zealand Prime after it was gone, but none would fight. As the formal session ended, Keithvar stood alone in the center of the great chamber. Around him, the representatives filed out, returning to their ships and their safe worlds. Some nodded to him with what might have been sympathy. Others avoided looking at him entirely. My people trusted in the council, Keithvar whispered to the empty chamber. We believed that civilization meant helping each other. We were wrong. Meanwhile, far from the galactic core, a small monitoring station orbited a dim red star. The station was automated, built to watch for signals from the civilized galaxy. It had been placed there by a species that the Galactic Council didn't even know existed. The humans had been listening to galactic communications for 8 months now. Ever since their first faster-than-light ships had reached far enough from Earth to pick up alien signals, they had learned about the Council, about the various species, about the complex politics of galactic civilization. They had also learned that they were classified as inhabitants of a Class 12 death world and were considered too dangerous for contact. Lieutenant Kate Murphy was on duty when Kethvar's transmission reached the monitoring station. She was young, barely 25, with short red hair and green eyes that reflected her Irish ancestry. Like most of the people assigned to the deep space monitoring stations, she was smart, curious, and very good at her job. She played the Zalani ambassador's plea 3 times before she fully understood what she was hearing. "Jesus Christ," she whispered to the empty control room. "They're asking for help and nobody's coming." Kate had grown up in Boston in a family that had produced soldiers, police officers, and firefighters for 6 generations. Her grandfather had been a Marine. Her father was a firefighter. Her brother was serving with the Colonial Defense Force on Mars. The idea of ignoring a call for help was simply not in her DNA. She opened a quantum communication link to Earth Defense Command. The signal would take 6 hours to reach home, but this couldn't wait. "Earthcom, this is Deep Space Monitor Station 7, she transmitted. "I have a code silver situation. Alien species under attack, requesting immediate assistance. Sending full data packet now." The message raced through space at faster-than-light speeds. It reached Earth in the middle of the night local time. But the officers at Earth Defense Command never slept when there were humans in space. Within minutes, the transmission was being analyzed by the best minds in human space. Captain Jake Morrison was commanding the heavy cruiser Defiance on patrol near the edge of human territory when he received the alert. He was a career military officer, 42 years old, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belt and rebels in the outer colonies, but he had never faced anything like this. "Comms, get me a direct link to Admiral Brooks," he ordered his communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Patterson. "Priority Alpha." "Aye, sir." "Establishing quantum link now." Admiral Lisa Brooks was in her office at Earth Defense Command when the call came through. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for getting things done. She had commanded fleets in 3 different wars and had never lost a ship to enemy action. She listened to Morrison's report without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "How many ships can we muster?" she finally asked. "Ma'am, if we pull from all 6 fleets, we could have maybe 250 ships. But against thousands of enemy vessels." "Captain, in my experience, it's not about how many ships you have. It's about how willing you are to use them." Brooks stood and walked to the window of her office. Outside, she could see Earth in all its blue and white beauty. It was a world that had tried to kill humanity for millions of years. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, plagues, predators. Earth had thrown everything at the human race, and humanity had survived it all. "Send word to all fleet commanders," Brooks said. "We're going to help those crystal people, and we're going to show the galaxy what happens when you mess with innocent folks." Within hours, ships began moving throughout human space. Crews were called back from leave. Supplies were loaded. Weapons were checked and double-checked. The galaxy was about to meet the species from the Death World, and they were coming to help. Admiral Lisa Brooks stood in front of the massive holographic display in Earth Defense Command's war room. The 3-dimensional map showed human space in blue dots of light. Each dot represented a colony, a space station, or a military base. Ships were moving between them like fireflies in the darkness, but today all those ships were moving in the same direction. "Status report, Colonel," Brooks said to the tall man standing beside her. Colonel Ryan Murphy had been her chief of staff for 3 years. He was a steady, reliable officer who never panicked, even when things looked impossible. Today, his face showed the kind of calm focus that came before a major battle. "Ma'am, the response has been incredible," Murphy said, consulting his tablet. "Every single fleet commander has volunteered their ships. Admiral Chen is bringing the Pacific Fleet from the Centauri colonies. Admiral Rodriguez has the Atlantic Fleet moving in from the Vega system. Even Captain Williams is pulling his deep space patrol ships back from the outer rim." Brooks nodded, watching the display. Each moving dot represented hundreds of human lives, men and women who had volunteered to fly across the galaxy to help people they had never met. "What about the civilian response?" she asked. Murphy's face broke into a rare smile. "That's the really amazing part, Admiral. We're getting volunteers from everywhere. Cargo ship captains are offering to carry supplies. Mining companies are donating raw materials. Even retired officers are coming out of civilian life to help." The display changed to show a tactical view of the Zilani system. Intelligence reports from the monitoring stations painted a grim picture. The Devourer fleet was massive, far larger than any human force had ever faced. "Intelligence assessment?" Brooks asked. Commander Sarah Price stepped forward from the analysis station. She was young for her rank, but she had the kind of sharp mind that could see patterns others missed. "The Devourers are unlike anything we've faced before, Admiral. Their ships are part machine, part living creature. They can repair themselves, adapt to new threats, and they seem to share some kind of group intelligence." Brooks studied the enemy formation. The Devourer ships looked like mechanical insects crossed with deep-sea creatures. They moved in perfect coordination, like a school of predator fish. "What are their weaknesses?" "That's the problem, ma'am. They don't seem to have any obvious ones. They've consumed 17 star systems without losing a major engagement. Every species that's fought them has been defeated. What makes them so effective?" Price manipulated the display, showing recordings of previous battles. "They adapt, Admiral. Energy weapons that work at first become useless after a few minutes. Their living ships learn to resist whatever hits them. They also use organic weapons that can think for themselves." Brooks watched a recording of Devourer bio-missiles chasing down fleeing ships. The organic weapons moved like living things, dodging defensive fire and striking with deadly accuracy. "But they've never fought humans before," she said quietly. Murphy looked up from his reports. "Ma'am, with respect, we're outnumbered at least 20-1, maybe more, even with our best ships and crews. Colonel, do you know why Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world?" "Yes, ma'am. The Galactic classification system rates planetary danger levels. Class 12 is the highest rating. It means a planet where survival requires constant adaptation and extreme resilience." Brooks walked to another display showing Earth from space. The blue and white marble looked peaceful from orbit, but she knew better. "Our planet has tried to kill us for millions of years, Ryan. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years. Volcanic eruptions that blacked out the sun. Asteroid impacts that wiped out entire species. Predators that hunted us. Diseases that killed millions." She turned back to the tactical display. "And we survived all of it. We didn't just survive, we thrived. We learned to work together because we had to. We learned to fight because everything on our world wanted to eat us. We learned to never give up because giving up meant extinction." Captain Jake Morrison's image appeared on the communication screen. His ship, the Defiance, was leading the advance elements of the human fleet. "Admiral, we're 18 hours out from the rendezvous point," Morrison reported. "All ships are reporting ready for combat operations." "Good to hear, Jake. How are the crews holding up?" Morrison's weathered face showed a slight smile. "They're eager, ma'am. Word has gotten around about what we're facing. Nobody's backing down." After Morrison signed off, Brooks turned to Murphy. "Send a message to all ship commanders. Full briefing in 6 hours. I want everyone to understand what we're up against." Meanwhile, in the Zilani system, Ambassador Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the orbital defense platform. Below him, the crystal cities of Zilan Prime sparkled in the light of their sun. It was beautiful, and in less than 3 weeks, it would all be gone. "Any word from the evacuation fleet?" asked Elder Methkane, his ancient crystalline form dim with sorrow. "They can carry perhaps 800,000 of our people," Kethvar replied. "Out of 12 billion, the lottery system for evacuation spots has already begun riots in some cities." The Elder's form grew even dimmer. "Perhaps it would be kinder to let them all face the end together." Kethvar was about to reply when his communication device chimed. An urgent message was coming through on the emergency frequency. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Coalition," the voice said through the translator. "We received your distress signal. We are en route to assist." Keithvar stared at the device in confusion. Earth Defense Coalition? I do not recognize that designation. We're human, Morrison's voice continued. We'll be arriving in your system in approximately 16 hours. Please transmit your current tactical situation and evacuation status. The Zilani ambassador looked at Elder Methcane in bewilderment. Humans? There is no species called humans in the Galactic database. Perhaps it is another name for one of the Council races? Keithvar quickly accessed the Galactic database through his neural interface. He searched for any reference to humans or Earth. What he found made his crystalline form flicker with shock. They are from the Forbidden Zone, he whispered. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. The file says the inhabitants are too dangerous for contact, and they are coming to help us? Before Keithvar could answer, space around Zilon Prime began to shimmer. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. But these were not the organic, flowing forms of Devourer vessels. These ships were angular, aggressive, built for war. The human fleet had arrived. Admiral Brooks stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Washington. Around her, the command crew worked with quiet efficiency. These were people who had trained for years in Earth's brutal military academies, where failure meant death and success meant survival. Sensor report, Brooks ordered. Ma'am, we have 237 human vessels in formation. All ships report ready for combat, said Commander Tony Garcia from the sensor station. What about the enemy? Garcia's face grew pale. Admiral, I'm reading over 3,000 Devourer ships. They're huge. Some of them are the size of small moons. Brooks studied the tactical display. The enemy fleet looked like a swarm of mechanical insects spreading across space. Each ship pulsed with organic life, and they moved with perfect coordination. Communications, open a channel to the Zilani government. Channel open, Admiral. This is Admiral Lisa Brooks of the Earth Defense Coalition. We understand you're facing an invasion. We're here to help. On the surface of Zilon Prime, Keithvar could barely speak. Admiral Brooks, we are grateful beyond words. But surely you understand the odds. The Devourer fleet has never been defeated. They number in the thousands. Ambassador, where I come from, we have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. We didn't come here to lose. Across the human fleet, ships prepared for battle. Captain Sarah Collins sealed herself into the cockpit of her fighter aboard the carrier Yorktown. Around her, 200 other pilots did the same. They were young, men and women who had trained in combat simulators based on Earth's most dangerous environments. Listen up, people, Collins said over the squadron frequency. We're about to make first contact with a hostile alien species. Remember your training. Remember why we're here. We're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting for people who asked for help when nobody else would answer. In the engineering sections of human ships, technicians made final checks on weapons that no other species in the galaxy used. Nuclear warheads sat beside kinetic projectiles. Railguns were powered up alongside plasma cannons. The humans had brought every weapon their violent history had taught them to build. On Zilon Prime, millions of crystalline beings looked up at their night sky. For the first time in weeks, they saw something other than despair. Strange ships from an unknown species were moving to stand between them and destruction. Elder Methcane stood beside Keithvar on the observation platform. These humans, he said quietly. Why would they risk their lives for us? Keithvar thought about the question. Every species in the galaxy operated on principles of mutual benefit, strategic advantage, or resource exchange. But these humans had simply heard a cry for help and responded. The Devourer scout ships reached the outer edge of the Zilani system like a spreading infection. Each vessel was a nightmare mixture of metal and flesh pulsing with unnatural life. They moved through space the way sharks move through water, with deadly purpose and hunger. The Overmind's consciousness flowed through every ship in the massive fleet. It was an intelligence that had consumed the thoughts and memories of thousands of species over 3 centuries. No single enemy had ever provided meaningful resistance. The Zilani would fall like all the others. But as the scouts began their work, something unexpected appeared on the long-range sensors. Ships were coming out of hyperspace at the system's edge. The energy signatures were completely unknown. The ship designs matched nothing in the Overmind's vast database of consumed civilizations. What are those vessels? The Overmind asked itself, its thoughts rippling through the bio-neural networks of the fleet. In 300 years of expansion, it had never encountered anything like these angular, aggressive-looking ships. Aboard the lead human vessel, the UES Washington, Admiral Brooks studied the enemy formation on her tactical display. The Devourer ships moved in perfect coordination, like a single living organism. Some were the size of destroyers, others dwarfed battleships. The largest looked like mechanical planets covered in organic growth. "Jesus Christ," whispered Commander Tony Garcia from the sensor station. "Admiral, I'm reading over 4,000 enemy vessels. Some of those things are 20 kilometers long." Brooks felt her stomach tighten, but her voice remained steady. "All ships battle stations. Prepare for combat operations." Throughout the human fleet, alarm klaxons wailed. Men and women ran to their battle positions, their faces set with determination. They knew the odds. They knew they were outnumbered 20-1. They came anyway. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching his crew prepare for battle. These were people who had volunteered to fly across the galaxy to help strangers. Not one of them had asked about the odds or suggested retreat. "Communications, open a channel to the Zilani government," Morrison ordered. Lieutenant Amy Patterson's fingers danced across her console. "Channel open, sir." Morrison took a deep breath. This would be humanity's first official contact with an alien civilization. The moment would be remembered forever, assuming anyone survived to remember it. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Coalition. We received your distress signal. We're here to help." On the surface of Zelan Prime, Ambassador Kethvar nearly dropped his communication device. The voice speaking through the translator was calm, confident, and completely unfamiliar. "Who are you?" Kethvar transmitted back. "What species sends ships to die for strangers?" "We call ourselves humans," Morrison replied simply. "And we're not here to die. We're here to fight." In the government chambers of Zelan Prime, chaos erupted. Elder Meth Kane's crystalline form brightened with amazement. "Humans? There is no record of this species in our databases." Kethvar quickly searched the galactic archives. What he found made his entire body flicker with shock. They are from the Forbidden Zone. Earth, classified as a Class 12 death world. The file warns that the inhabitants are extremely dangerous and should not be contacted under any circumstances. "And they came to help us?" Before anyone could answer, the first shots of the battle were fired. The Devourer fleet launched a wave of living missiles at the human formation. The organic weapons pulsed with their own life, designed to think and adapt during flight. They had never failed to reach their targets. They met something completely new. "Point defense. Engage targets," ordered Captain Morrison. The human ships opened fire with weapons the galaxy had never seen. Streams of depleted uranium slugs traveling at incredible speeds tore through space. The living missiles, designed to adapt to energy weapons and electronic countermeasures, had no defense against simple metal moving very fast. The organic weapons simply ceased to exist. On the Devourer flagship, the Overmind reeled in confusion. Its biomissiles were designed to be unstoppable. They could dodge laser fire, absorb plasma bolts, and override electronic defenses. But these primitive kinetic weapons destroyed them before they could adapt. "All ships weapons free," Admiral Brooks commanded. "Show them what Deathworlders do to bullies." The human fleet opened fire with everything they had. Nuclear warheads detonated among the Devourer formations like miniature suns. The electromagnetic pulses from the explosions disrupted the bioelectrical systems that controlled the enemy ships. Several Devourer vessels began spinning helplessly through space. Railgun rounds punched through adaptive armor that had never faced simple kinetic force applied with overwhelming power. The living hull plating of Devourer ships, which could heal from energy weapon damage, was torn apart by metal slugs moving at significant fractions of light speed. Captain Sarah Collins led her fighter squadron in a diving attack on a Devourer biocarrier. The massive creature ship was launching smaller attack forms when her squadron struck. Her fighters moved in patterns that seemed random, but were actually based on the flight of Earth's predator birds. "Blue Squadron, follow my lead," Collins commanded. "Hit them fast, hit them hard, then get out." Her pulse lasers carved deep wounds in the biocarrier's living hull while her wingman, Lieutenant Ben Carter, launched a spread of fusion torpedoes into the creature's exposed interior. The explosions lit up space as the enemy ship writhed in apparent pain. The Overmind tried to analyze these new weapons and tactics, but the humans kept changing their approach. Every time the Devourer forces began to adapt to one weapon system, the enemy ship switched to another. They fought with a combination of brutal efficiency and creative improvisation that the Overmind had never encountered. "Admiral, the enemy is trying to surround us," reported Commander Garcia. "They're moving to encircle our formation." Brooks smiled grimly. "Let them come. All ships prepare for close combat operations." The human vessels began to move in patterns that would have seemed insane to any other military force. Ships deliberately exposed themselves to enemy fire, while others maneuvered for killing shots. Damaged vessels continued fighting even when they should have retreated. The UES Charleston took hits from 3 Devourer plasma cannons. Her hull was breached in 7 places and her main engines were failing, but Captain Linda Ross kept her ship in the fight. "Engineering, I need power to weapons," she commanded. "Captain, we're losing atmosphere on 6 decks. We should evacuate," her executive officer warned. "Negative. We came here to fight. Route emergency power to the railguns." The Charleston's final salvo destroyed 2 Devourer cruisers before the ship's reactor finally failed. Captain Ross and her crew had bought precious time for the evacuation shuttles to reach safety. On Zealand Prime, millions of crystalline beings watched the battle unfold in their night sky. Explosions lit up space like fireworks, but these were the fires of war. For the first time in weeks, hope began to grow in their hearts. "They're fighting for us," whispered Elder Methkane. "Beings we have never met are dying to protect us." Kethvar watched as another human ship exploded in brilliant light, taking a Devourer dreadnought with it. They call it being human. Perhaps we are witnessing something the galaxy has forgotten. The battle raged for hours. The human fleet was slowly being overwhelmed by sheer numbers, but they extracted a terrible price from their enemies. For every human ship destroyed, dozens of Devourer vessels died. The space around Zealand Prime became a graveyard of twisted biomechanical hulks and burning human vessels. The Overmind began to feel something it had never experienced before: uncertainty. These humans fought with a ferocity that went beyond mere survival instinct. They seemed willing to sacrifice everything to protect beings they had just met. It was a concept the Overmind could not process. Admiral Brooks watched the tactical display with growing concern. They were holding their own, but barely. The enemy numbers seemed endless, and her fleet was taking heavy casualties. "Ma'am, we've lost 18 ships," reported Garcia. "The enemy has lost over 200, but they just keep coming." Brooks nodded grimly. They needed to change tactics, and fast. "All ships form Sigma Protocol. We're going to show them why humans conquered their homeworld." Across the human fleet, ships began to move in new patterns. They were formations developed on Earth, tested in the brutal wars that had shaped human history. They were tactics born from a species that had spent millions of years learning that survival meant fighting smarter, not just harder. The Devourer forces moved to counter the new human formation, but something was wrong. The biomechanical ships that had moved with perfect coordination were starting to show signs of confusion. Some vessels hesitated before following orders. Others moved too slowly to keep up with formation changes. The Overmind was beginning to understand what it faced. These were not just another species to be consumed. These were predators from a world so dangerous that it had forged them into something unique. They fought not just to survive, but to protect others. It was a concept that went against everything the Devourers understood about existence. And for the first time in 3 centuries, the Overmind felt something approaching fear. The battle had been raging for 14 hours. Space around Zealand Prime looked like a war zone from the worst nightmares. Broken pieces of ships drifted through the darkness. Some were twisted metal from human vessels. Others were chunks of biomechanical flesh from Devourer ships. The debris field stretched across thousands of kilometers. Captain Jake Morrison gripped the arms of his command chair as another explosion rocked the Defiance. His ship had taken 17 direct hits, but she was still fighting. Around him, his crew worked with the kind of calm focus that came from knowing they might die at any moment. "Damage report," Morrison called out. "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7, reported Chief Engineer Linda Hayes. "We've lost 2 railgun turrets and the port missile launcher, but the main reactor is still online." Morrison nodded. They could keep fighting. That was all that mattered. On his main screen, he watched the UES Charleston break apart under concentrated fire from 3 Devourer dreadnoughts. Captain Ross and her crew had held their position to the end, buying time for a medical ship to escape. 230 humans had died in those few seconds. "Admiral, we can't keep this up," Morrison transmitted to the Washington. "We're losing ships faster than we can replace them." Admiral Brooks's voice came back steady and calm. "Agreed, Jake. All ships form Sigma Protocol. Time to show them why humans conquered their homeworld." Across the human fleet, ships began to move in patterns that would have looked like madness to any other species. Vessels deliberately exposed themselves to enemy fire while others moved into killing positions. Damaged ships didn't retreat to safety. Instead, they moved closer to the enemy. The Sigma Protocol was based on lessons learned in Earth's most brutal wars. It was a tactic born from desperation, refined by necessity, and perfected by a species that had survived everything their violent planet could throw at them. Captain Sarah Collins felt her fighter shudder as plasma fire scorched past her cockpit. Her squadron had been reduced from 24 fighters to 8, but they kept fighting. They dove through formations of Devourer bioships like hawks attacking a flock of ravens. "Blue Leader, my weapons are empty," reported Lieutenant Ben Carter over the comm. "Then ram the biggest target you can find," Collins replied without hesitation. "Make it count." Carter's fighter accelerated toward a Devourer command ship, its engines glowing white-hot. The young pilot from Texas had volunteered for this mission knowing he might not come home. As his fighter slammed into the enemy vessel, he transmitted a final message. "Remember the Alamo? You bastards." The explosion took out the Devourer ship's bio-neural network, leaving it drifting helpless in space. On the surface of Zalon Prime, Ambassador Kethvar watched the battle with growing amazement. These humans fought like nothing he had ever seen. When their weapons ran out, they used their ships as weapons. When their ships were destroyed, the survivors kept fighting from escape pods. "They are dying for us," Elder Methkane said, his crystalline form flickering with emotion. "Beings we have never met are giving their lives to protect us." "It makes no sense," Kethvar replied. "Every species in the galaxy operates on principles of mutual benefit. Trade agreements, defense pacts, resource exchanges. But these humans, they came simply because we asked for help." Above them, another human ship died in a ball of nuclear fire. But as it died, its final missile salvo destroyed 2 Devourer cruisers. The humans were trading their lives at a rate that should have been impossible to sustain. The Overmind was beginning to understand something that chilled its vast intelligence. These creatures weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting for something it had never encountered before. The idea that some things were worth dying for. The biomechanical ships of the Devourer fleet had been designed to fight species that valued their own survival above all else. But the humans seemed to care more about protecting strangers than preserving their own lives. "All ships concentrate fire on the enemy flagship," Admiral Brooks commanded. "Take out their command structure." The remaining human vessels turned toward the massive Devourer mothership. It was easily 50 times larger than the biggest human battleship, covered in organic weapons that pulsed with their own life. But the humans didn't hesitate. The UES Washington led the charge, her hull scarred and burning, but her weapons still functional. Brooks stood on her bridge, watching the enemy flagship grow larger on the main screen. "Ma'am, they're concentrating all their fire on us," reported Commander Garcia. "We won't survive a direct assault on that thing." "Maybe not," Brooks replied. "But we'll make sure they remember us." The human fleet's attack on the Devourer flagship was like watching ants attack a giant. The biomechanical monster's weapons reached out like tentacles of death, destroying ship after ship. But the humans kept coming. Captain Morrison pushed the Defiance past her safety limits. His ship's engines were overloading, his weapons were nearly depleted, and half his crew was dead or wounded. But he could see what Admiral Brooks was trying to do. "All remaining fighters form up on the Defiance," he transmitted. "We're going to punch a hole in their defenses." What was left of the human fighter squadrons rallied around Morrison's ship. There weren't many left. Captain Collins led 6 fighters from 3 different squadrons. Lieutenant Martinez commanded 4 bombers whose wings were held together by emergency patches. Ensign Kelly flew a fighter that was leaking atmosphere from a dozen holes. They dove toward the Devourer flagship like a spear thrown by an angry god. The enemy ship's bioweapons reached out to stop them. Living missiles the size of shuttles streaked through space. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids focused their fire on the attacking humans. Organic fighters that moved like mechanical insects swarmed around the human formation. Ship after ship died in the attack. But each death brought the survivors closer to their target. Captain Collins saw her opening. The Devourer flagship's main bioneural cluster was exposed, glowing like a sick green heart in the creature's mechanical chest. She armed her ship's emergency nuclear device. "This is Blue Leader to all ships," she transmitted on all frequencies. "It's been an honor serving with you. Tell Earth we did our job." Her fighter, damaged and streaming fire, accelerated toward the heart of the enemy flagship. The Devourer's defensive systems focused all their power on stopping her, but it was too late. Sarah Collins, fighter pilot from Denver, Colorado, flew her ship directly into the Overmind's core consciousness. The nuclear explosion lit up space like a second sun. The bioneural networks that connected every ship in the Devourer fleet went silent for a crucial moment. The collective intelligence that had guided their expansion for 3 centuries suddenly couldn't think. Admiral Brooks felt the shockwave from Collins's sacrifice rock her ship. On the tactical display, she watched as Devourer vessels across the battlefield began to drift aimlessly. Their perfect coordination was gone. "All ships, full attack," she commanded. "Break their formation while they're stunned." The surviving human vessels surged forward. Nuclear fire bloomed like deadly flowers among the confused Devourer ships. Railgun rounds punched through armor that no longer knew how to adapt. The biomechanical fleet that had conquered 17 star systems began to die. Lieutenant Ben Carter's replacement, Ensign Tommy Wright from Alabama, led the final fighter attack. His ship was held together by emergency welds and desperate hope, but his weapons were still functional. "This is for Captain Collins," he transmitted as his missiles found their target. "This is for everyone who died today." The tide of battle turned in those crucial minutes. The Devourer fleet, stripped of its guiding intelligence, began to retreat. Ship after ship fled into hyperspace, their biomechanical forms scarred and broken. But the cost had been terrible. Of the 237 ships that had entered the battle, only 68 were still capable of fighting. Thousands of humans had died in the space around Zalon Prime. On the surface of the crystal world, millions of beings looked up at their night sky and saw something they had thought impossible. The Devourer fleet was retreating. The nightmare that had haunted the galaxy for 3 centuries was running away. Ambassador Kethvar opened a communication channel to the human fleet. His voice shook with emotion as he spoke. "Admiral Brooks, we do not have words to thank you. You have saved our entire civilization." Brooks's image appeared on the screen. Her uniform was torn, her face was streaked with smoke, but her eyes were calm and steady. "Ambassador, we just did what anyone should do when innocent people need help. But the cost. So many of your people died for us. That's what makes us human," Brooks replied simply. "We stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves." The battle was over. The Devourers were defeated, and the galaxy had learned what it meant to be human. 5 days had passed since the battle ended. The space around Zealand Prime was still filled with debris, but now it was also filled with something else. Hope. Human and Zalani ships worked side by side, rescuing survivors and repairing damaged stations. Admiral Lisa Brooks stood in the crystal gardens of the Zalani capital city. The plants here were made of living light, growing in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly, but they were beautiful in a way that took her breath away. Around her, beings made of living crystal moved with fluid grace, their forms throwing rainbow patterns across the garden paths. Brooks still wore her battle-damaged uniform. She had been offered new clothes, but something made her keep wearing the torn and scorched fabric. Maybe it was respect for the people who had died. Maybe it was a reminder of what they had accomplished. "Your species continues to amaze us, Admiral," said Elder Methkane. The ancient Zalani's voice created harmonics that the translation devices turned into something like deep respect, mixed with wonder. "How so?" Brooks asked, watching human and Zalani technicians work together on a damaged orbital platform, visible through the garden's crystal dome. "You fought for us without knowing us. You sacrificed everything for complete strangers. In all our centuries of watching the galaxy, we have never seen anything like it." Brooks thought about that. "Where we come from, Elder. That's just what you do when someone needs help. It's not complicated." The Elder's crystalline form brightened with what humans were learning was the Zalani way of showing surprise. "But surely your people must have expected something in return. Trade agreements? Military alliances, resource rights. We expected to help people who were in trouble, Brooks replied simply. That's it. Captain Jake Morrison joined them in the garden. His left arm was in a medical sling and his face bore the marks of his ship's final battle. The Defiance had survived, but just barely. Half her crew was in medical facilities and the ship would need months of repairs. Admiral, I just got word from Earth Command, Morrison said. The news about what happened here is spreading across human space. Colony governors are asking how they can help with reconstruction efforts. Brooks nodded. It didn't surprise her. Humans had a long history of helping each other rebuild after disasters. It seemed natural that they would want to help their new alien friends do the same. What about the Galactic response? She asked. Morrison's expression grew more complicated. That's interesting. We're getting communication requests from 17 different species. Everyone wants to know who we are and where we came from. Elder Methkane's form grew brighter. The news of your victory has spread throughout the galaxy, Admiral. The species that refuse to help us are now very eager to make contact with humanity. Brooks felt a flash of anger. Where were they when you needed help? Exactly what I said to the Altarian ambassador when he called this morning, the Elder replied with what might have been amusement. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council chambers, an emergency session was in progress. The same representatives who had refused to help the Zilani now sat in stunned silence as they reviewed battle reports from the Zilan system. High Counselor Vex Thane floated in his hoverpod, his blue-gray skin showing patches of nervous energy. Are we certain these reports are accurate? A single unknown species defeated the Devourer fleet. The Nexari Union's robotic representative processed data with mechanical precision. Confirmed. Sensor readings indicate the Devourer fleet suffered 73% casualties before retreating. This represents the first major defeat of the Devourers in recorded history. Around the chamber, tentacles curled with anxiety. Scales changed color with stress. The most powerful civilizations in the galaxy were realizing they had made a terrible mistake. The Catherian ambassador's neck frills flared with embarrassment. The humans. They were classified as a restricted species, too dangerous for contact. And yet they were the only ones who answered the Zilani plea for help, observed the representative from the harmonium. Her gentle voice carried a note of shame that translated across species lines. Back on Zealand Prime, Ambassador Kethvar was dealing with a very different kind of problem. His communication systems were overloaded with incoming messages from species across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to establish diplomatic relations with the humans. It's ironic, he told Elder Methkane as they watched human engineers help repair a damaged power station. 3 weeks ago, the galaxy turned its back on us. Now everyone wants to be friends with the people who saved us. A young Zilani aide approached them, her crystalline form flickering with excitement. Ambassador, we have another message from the Altarian Collective. They're offering a formal treaty with both the Zilani Federation and the humans. Kethvar's form dimmed with disgust. Tell them we're too busy rebuilding to consider new treaties right now. The aide paused. Sir, they're also offering to provide humanitarian aid for our reconstruction efforts. Now they want to help, Kethvar muttered. After the fighting is over and the danger has passed. Elder Methkane's form grew brighter. Perhaps this is how change begins, young Kethvar. The humans have shown the galaxy something it had forgotten. 3 weeks later, Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the repaired Defiance as Earth came into view. His ship bore scars from the battle at Zealand Prime, but she was operational again. Zilani crystal technology had been used to strengthen her hull, creating patterns of light that made the human vessel look like something from a fairy tale. Home looks good, doesn't it, Captain? Lieutenant Amy Patterson observed from the communications station. Morrison nodded, thinking about everything that had happened. The human fleet that had left Earth had been explorers, reaching out into an unknown galaxy. The ships returning were veterans of humanity's first interstellar war. Indeed it does, Amy. But something tells me we won't be staying long. He was right. Even as the fleet approached Earth, new messages were coming in from across human space. Reports of pirate attacks on peaceful trade routes, distress calls from colonies being threatened by slavers, requests for help from species that had never heard of humans before the battle at Zealand Prime. On Earth, in the halls of the United Nations, Secretary General Maria Santos addressed the assembled representatives of humanity's governments. Behind her, A holographic display showed the galaxy with new markers indicating species that wanted to establish contact with Earth. The question before us today, Santos said, is not whether humanity is ready to take its place among the stars. We've already done that. The question is what kind of neighbor we want to be. The debate that followed would shape humanity's future among the stars. Some argued for caution, for careful diplomatic protocols and gradual expansion. Others called for humanity to embrace its new role as the galaxy's protector. In the end, the decision was made by the stories that came back from the Zealand system. Stories of Captain Sarah Collins flying her fighter into the heart of the enemy fleet. Stories of Captain Ross keeping her ship in the battle even as it died around her. Stories of ordinary humans doing extraordinary things because it was the right thing to do. 6 months after the Battle of Zalon Prime, human ships appeared at the edge of the Catherian system. Pirates had been raiding the outer colonies, and the Catherian military was stretched too thin to respond effectively. The pirates found themselves facing vessels that fought with the fury of Earth's hurricanes. Ships that didn't retreat when the odds were bad. Crews that treated every innocent life as worth protecting. Within days, the pirate threat was eliminated. The Catherian government offered the humans territorial concessions, trade agreements, and military alliances. The human fleet commander, Admiral Chen, politely declined everything except permission to refuel and treat his wounded. "We didn't come here for profit," he told the amazed Catherian officials. "We came because you asked for help." It was a response that became famous across the galaxy. The humans had power, technology, and military might, but they used it only to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The Morden found this out when human ships arrived to help them deal with a plague that was killing millions. The Theknari learned it when human engineers helped them rebuild after a natural disaster destroyed 3 of their worlds. Captain Morrison, now promoted to Commodore, commanded a small fleet of human vessels that seemed to appear wherever trouble was brewing. His ships bore the scars of dozens of battles fought for dozens of species. Commodore, his new aide, Lieutenant Kelly Barnes, asked one day, "Why do we keep doing this? We could go home, live in peace, let the galaxy sort out its own problems." Morrison looked out at the stars visible through the bridge's main viewer. Somewhere out there, the Zalani were rebuilding their civilization with human help. Somewhere else, former pirates were learning to make honest livings. In a dozen different systems, species that had been enemies for centuries were working together because humans had shown them it was possible. "Kelly, a long time ago, someone told me that the measure of a civilization isn't how advanced their technology is, or how many worlds they control. It's how they treat people who can't help themselves." He turned to look at his aide, a young woman from Mars who had volunteered for deep space service.